What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? After more than 150 conversations with executives from companies like Disney, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, I've learned that sports is a common denominator. Some of our guests' athletic experiences earned them a place in their sports hall of fame, like Chick-fil-A chairman Dan Cathy. Some hung up their cleats after high school, like Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, while others, like Condoleezza Rice, claim they weren't that great in their sport. But no matter their skill level, they have all told me that being a part of a team taught them leadership lessons that they still use today. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, I'm your host, Don Yeager, here to give you an all-access pass to genuine, authentic, fireside chat-like conversations with today's business icons so that you can create powerful change in your organization. This is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Melissa Harper, CEO of Good Sports, an organization that drives equitable access in youth sports by supporting kids in high-need communities. In the 2 decades since she co-founded Good Sports, they have supported 10 million kids to play and stay in sports. Melissa was named one of the 50 most innovative and passionate women in sports on Sports Business Journal's Game Changers list. And I loved preparing for today's interview because the University of Pennsylvania grad said she has never met a sport she didn't like. I'm looking forward to learning how to build great partnerships, just as she has with Dick's Sporting Goods, Gatorade, and Under Armour.
I am never satisfied. We might never solve the problem at a macro level, but there are kids playing today who didn't play yesterday because Good Sports supported them. It's not about perfection. It's always about progress. Just because we might not be able to do that for every kid everywhere doesn't mean we should leave the millions we're serving behind. And there's always another kid who needs our help.
Melissa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm fascinated by Good Sports, and I know you founded the organization in 2003, back, 21 years ago. Crazy. On this very simple principle, sports shouldn't be reserved for kids who can't afford equipment. And this year you hit $100 million in donations as a milestone. What an incredible number. What was the catalyst? What was the moment that you realized that this was a challenge?
Well, the group of us who co-founded the organization all had different experiences with sport, but what we all had in common is that sport had had a really big impact on our life. When we were young, you showed up, they gave you pretty much everything that you needed. Fees were minimal. Everybody got a chance to play. The industry has become a pay-to-play industry. Kids who don't have the resources are literally being left on the sideline. We couldn't live with it. So we just decided that we had to do something about it.
It is amazing when you start thinking about the income gap and all the other things that exist, that there are places where kids have entire closet fulls, and then some who are just looking forward to that one pair.
We did an event a few years ago where we did a shoe fitting. Every kid who participated in the event had the opportunity to work with one of our team or one of our partners' team to see what size shoe they wore, and they took home a brand new pair of shoes. And this little boy, his name was Brendan, came running up to me and he was like, Miss Melissa, does everybody get a pair of shoes? And I said, yeah. And I fitted him for a pair of shoes. And I said, and here's your pair, buddy. And he's like, they're mine to keep. And he had tears in his eyes, and he had never had his own brand new pair of shoes before. It was a moment that stopped my heart because you realize how fundamental some of the needs are that we're serving. Like really, really fundamental access to sport issues. When you make someone realize that, it makes it easy for them to get involved and want to participate. And then I think for some other folks, it's sort of hearing the statistics and the numbers associated with it. People don't realize that the average budget for a physical education program for equipment is $750 for the year. Think about trying to keep hundreds of kids active every school day, all year long, with $750 worth of equipment.
Mm.
It's almost impossible.
Wow. I can only imagine how much that touched your heart. A big part of your success has been establishing relationships with some pretty incredible companies: Nike, Wilson, Adidas, Gatorade. In your experience, what are the elements that make a great partnership?
Our most successful partnerships are holistic in nature. So there are benefits to them for sure, but they're not doing it for purely self serving reasons. They're donating equipment to us, but it's also solving an operational challenge for them. I think that's one of the things that distinguishes Good Sports from a traditional charity is that Nike, Under Armour, Wilson, Dick's Sporting Goods, Gatorade, they're all also donating product to us that would otherwise they would have to find another solution for. When the license changes or they're moving a warehouse or a forecast isn't what they thought it would be, they donate that product to us and we get it into the hands of kids who need it. So it's solving a financial operational challenge for them while simultaneously benefiting the community.
You're absolutely creating win-win.
100%. We're trying to understand what motivates them. Why do they care about this? Why do they want to work with Good Sports? And build a relationship that meets those goals and objectives without compromising the benefit on the community. Because at the end of the day, what's most important to us is that every kid gets a chance to play. Recently, one of the folks that we supported with our first 500 basketballs in Boston when we started the organization 21 years ago, Greg Davis, he ran a basketball league out of the Boston Housing Authority in our early days, was the recipient of some of the very first basketballs that we distributed. He recently retired. And one of the things that he said in his retirement is that if it wasn't for the support that he got from Good Sports, he might not have stayed working in youth development for the past 30 years. That we really gave him the resources that he needed to show up for the kids.
Yeah. Now, you discussed some of the ways their products end up in your hands. A forecast was wrong and they ended up with more cleats than they thought they needed or whatever it is. Do they ever end up sending you things that even you can't find a solution for?
They used to. When we first started, that was one of the things that was a challenge in the early days of building Good Sports is we thought that we needed to say yes to everybody. When they wanted to send us product that wasn't super beneficial to the community, we felt like we had to take it anyway and then find another way to solve that problem for us. Now we've established ourselves enough in the industry that we can legitimately say to our partners, thanks, but no thanks. Like that particular product won't benefit the kids we serve. So it doesn't make sense for it to come into our warehouse and us have to find a way to solve that. Now they work with us really on terms that are jointly defined and ultimately benefit the kids.
Yeah.
The clarity of mission helped us a lot in those early days because people understood what we did. When you explain to someone that you're giving equipment to organizations so that kids in high poverty communities can play, that they have access, it's so simple. I sometimes describe Good Sports as a food bank for sporting goods. That really made a big difference in the early days because people weren't afraid to jump on and support us because what we were doing was so clear and tangible.
There's such a big lesson in that when people don't have time for a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation. Boil it down to a bumper sticker, and you do. It's a food bank for sporting goods.
Yeah.
Clarity, simplicity, really big takeaways there because sometimes we have such great ideas, but if it takes too long to explain them, they're not really great ideas.
And I think entrepreneurs and founders inherently know their area, their expertise, the thing that they're trying to solve so well. They have so much knowledge about it. They're so excited about it. They have a propensity to say way too much and to talk far too long about the work that they're doing. But thinking about how do you make your audience understand it really quickly and really powerfully, to me, that's the critical success factor in the early days when you might only get 2 minutes with someone. How do you make sure that they understand what you do and why it matters?
I love that. Great takeaway. You also have had some really great partnerships from Steph Curry, the New England Patriots, Chicago Cubs. How do those partnerships come to be?
Some of our partners naturally come to us because they're progressive in their thinking about their investments.
Mm.
Steph Curry has a great reputation for really supporting the community and being deeply invested in everything that he does. And when he built the Curry brand with Under Armour, they wanted a charitable component to it. They wanted something that would always give back to the community. And we had been longstanding partners with Under Armour, so they recommended that Good Sports would be a great fit for that.
That's awesome. And that's what partnership truly looks like. Long before you got some of these big names, I read a story that your first employee would often stuff his car with equipment, take it to UPS Dropbox. Now you have a 37,000 square foot warehouse, entire team of employees, and even some volunteers. We started with the bumper sticker, food bank for sporting goods. But ultimately, you do have to develop the ability to tell your story. How did storytelling become part of your journey?
It's helping the people connect with your mission and what you're trying to accomplish. A good example of that is in our She Who Plays program. We're focused on distributing equipment for girls to make sure that girls have access to sport because they drop out at twice the rate of boys.
Right.
This comes as a shock to many, but 75% of the programs we serve tell us that their girls don't have sports bras.
Hmm.
That's as fundamental as it gets for a teenage girl. We have stories of girls telling us it was the first sports bra they've ever been given. It's the first one they didn't have to share with their sister.
Yeah, the statistics can actually help you gain some macro detail, but it's the individual kid stories. It's the little boy who gets his first pair of shoes that will stick with you forever. When I look at the success ratio of organizations like yours, it comes back so often to the ability to tell the story and to identify those kids that we're all seeing ourselves in our own way, thinking, man, they're by the grace of God.
Yeah, and I do think sport has that capacity, which probably gives Good Sports an advantage in some ways because most people can identify with sport in some way. There's some experience that they've had in their life that was meaningful to them, good or bad, from a sport perspective. It's hard to find someone who can completely not relate to the work that we do. It's a matter of figuring out, like, why would they care?
Yeah. We talk a lot about teams on this podcast. In the world of corporate lexicon, the word teams, I think, is often overused. If you were trying to help coach one of us into being able to build a team, what are some of the ways that you could help me coach others on being a better team builder?
The biggest, most fundamental thing about a team is the whole team's aligned around a common goal.
Hmm.
If the whole team doesn't know what that goal is and isn't rallying toward the same end, then it's really difficult to create that sense of team and that sense of community. On a sports team, that's relatively easy because you're always looking to score the goal or win the game. But when you're in a business environment, it's much more difficult because you have to figure out how do you get everybody working on the same thing, moving in the same direction. And being really transparent with the team about what that common goal is and how are we going to get there. It's sort of constantly putting out and reinforcing the end goal for the organization, whether it's the end goal for the year or a longer term vision, but making sure that everyone knows where they're headed. Also, being humble in the way that you lead and recognizing that successful ideas and the next best approach for something in the organization can come from anywhere.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter whether it's a summer intern who comes up with a great idea or your longest standing employee or your senior executive. It matters that everybody is constantly trying to get better.
Mm.
That's the other thing that sports teams have in common. The really successful ones are never satisfied with how far they've come. There's always another game to win, another accomplishment to tackle. Successful businesses have to operate in the same way. We should always be striving to get better, to do more, to improve. And if your whole team is rallied around that and feels like mistakes are acceptable and getting better is the end goal, they aren't afraid to put themselves out there.
Along those lines, one of the things I know we're celebrating in doing this podcast is part of your little victory tour you're taking right now. Some really cool accomplishments, $100 million, 10 million children served.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things to do is say, okay, here's what the next one is, and we're going to attack it with the same level of ferocity. Once you've achieved what you'd told everybody for the last 21 years you were setting out to do, where do you go next? And how do you get them all to bring that same level of fire?
I am never satisfied. We haven't solved this problem. As long as there's still a kid who's on the sideline because they don't have the resources to play, our job is not done. It's one of the benefits and one of the drawbacks of tackling a systemic issue in our society. It really is never complete. It's never solved. But I can't accept the fact that there's still kids who can't play. So I'm always looking at how do we do more? How do we serve them better? How do we make sure that there isn't a story of a kid who doesn't have the resources? We might never solve the problem at a macro level because the amount of resources that it would take to do that might be insurmountable. But I can guarantee we're solving that problem for individual kids. There are kids that are playing today who didn't play yesterday because Good Sports supported them. It's not about perfection. It's always about progress. Just because we might not be able to do that for every kid everywhere doesn't mean we should leave the millions we're serving behind.
I love it. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. You mentioned early that the founding group that came together, all of you had different relationships to sports. Now, I know you personally played sports since your dad put a little league hat on your head, 4 years old. You've never met a sport you didn't like. Fascinating to me. Is there a specific story from your time on a field or court as a child that you still think about today as you think about what you get a chance to do and who you get a chance to impact?
Growing up, I was never the popular kid. I was smart and athletic, didn't really fit in either group. I wasn't sort of nerdy enough to be in the smart group, and I wasn't sporty enough to be in the athletic group.
You played Division I field hockey at Pennsylvania. And since then, I understand you've run several marathons.
Yeah, well, I walked on to the UPenn team, and I wasn't necessarily getting the most playing time.
That's okay. It takes work.
They didn't kick me off the field, so
Right.
but I never really fit in. I was always sort of in between all the groups that you see in middle school and high school. Sport for me helped me find my place, the discipline, the structure, the being a part of a team. I became captain of some of the teams that I was on. I was successful on the field or on the track, and it gave me a place to be that part of myself and have other teenagers accept me. That makes a big difference for a lot of kids, especially girls. Middle school and high school girls have an extreme lack of confidence. And if you can find a way to be successful in small ways, it can make a real difference in terms of the confidence that you bring forward for the rest of your life. That's what sport did for me when I needed it most.
Yeah. So I read a little bit about some of your discussions on leadership, and I know you've defined leadership as, quote, the base that lifts the rest of the team up. And you liken the entire idea about sports where the captain's not necessarily always the best player, but the one that encourages the team to become better, stronger, faster. What advice would you give a listener who wants to create a culture of empowerment like you're describing here?
To lead with humility. It's really important that leaders be humble. Don't believe that you have all the answers. Don't let your pride or your arrogance get in the way of progress. That often means asking my team questions rather than giving them answers, helping to push their thinking forward, pushing them to find solutions rather than coming to me for solutions. They might get annoyed with me at times, but usually when they come to me with a question, my answer is, well, what's your recommendation? Because I want to know whether they thought about it and I want to know what they think the solution should be rather than just immediately launching into what I think. In part, that's also letting them know that you believe they can. Sometimes people come to me and ask me a question or want a decision made. And my answer is, that's not my call, that's yours.
Mm.
Because I want them to make the decision and I want them to know that I believe they can. Some of it is just the way that you interact with your team, not always being the go-to person for the solution.
Wow.
I definitely think we have a problem-solving culture at Good Sports, and not built just by me, but I think everybody in the organization takes that approach. Empowering our team is the only way forward because I can't be involved in everything, and neither can my co-founder. We're trying to figure out the best ways to have the team make a lot of decisions without us.
You know, if we have somebody out there, a listener who might be thinking, you know what, I want to go do something bigger, better. I've loved what I've gotten a chance to do. I've made a little bit of money here or there. I want to go try to solve a problem. If you were to reach back and try to counsel a young Melissa on the idea of leaving a paid gig to go try to start an organization solving a problem, what would you suggest to the person that might be listening?
It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long road. And that doesn't mean it's a road you shouldn't take. It's just you have to be prepared that it's not going to be an overnight success. Sometimes not going to feel like you're making any progress. I mean, in the very early days, when you're first starting the business, there's more doors that close than open.
Right.
And that's really demoralizing. It's hard to get through those moments. That's why I think most organizations and businesses fail in the first few years, because when you're met with a lot of resistance, you have to find your way through. And that's not easy. But for me, I fundamentally believe that everything is possible if you focus on effort, creativity, and persistence. You can accomplish anything and you can move anything forward. You have to come at it with that kind of grit. When you're building something from scratch, you are going to hit obstacles. And sometimes you're going to feel like it's not going to work. Push through those moments, find your grit, find your strength, go forward anyway.
What kept you going?
Partly it's my passion and commitment to the mission. I believe in my core in what we do. I fundamentally think that sport is essential to the development of children, much like the premise of your podcast and the role that sport played in all of these people who have accomplished so much in all of their lives. If they never have the exposure, if they never get the opportunity, they don't become the next CEO of a Fortune 500 company. We have to make sure they have that first exposure, that first access in order for that to happen.
It's pretty powerful. You have a mantra, play to win. How is adopting this mindset of throwing yourself fully into everything you do, regardless of the outcome, shaped you? And where did that come from?
My dad in particular has a tremendous work ethic, the kind of person who cannot sit still and has to be doing something productive all the time. I have a little bit of that in my nature, that I am just very driven, very motivated. That in and of itself creates a strong foundation for my mindset. I am as intense a person in the gym as I am in the office, and I take everything that I do really seriously. And sometimes I guess it's intimidating, but it's really just that I believe in full commitment and full participation in everything that you do.
Wow. So, one of the questions we've asked a number of guests is around the idea of momentum. I know you're a Patriots fan, and actually, this concept that we started talking about really began with that Super Bowl win over the Atlanta Falcons. Down 28-3, suddenly things start turning, and pretty soon, momentum's on the other sideline. In the creation of Good Sports, in the creation of this $100 million that you've grown to, was there a moment, a spark, a place where this kind of good idea suddenly caught fire and things started to take off? Was there something there that made a difference?
Yeah, I would say we were a few years into building the organization, and one of our philanthropic partners, the National Recreation Foundation, gave us funding to think about growth. And they were willing to support the effort to figure out what that growth might look like. What it really came down to is, what do we want to be? We could have stayed small and regional and dug really deep and supported a lot of kids locally in a really meaningful way over the last 20 years. Or we could go national and support kids all over the country and become a building block, a foundation for the entire youth sports industry. What does growth look like for good sports? We could get Nike and Under Armour and Spalding and Wilson and Dick's on board by doing that. They're national and international companies, and they want to see their product and their philanthropy supporting kids everywhere, not just in Massachusetts or New England.
So you are the center of the sporting universe. I mean, just ask you.
Well, we like to think so, but um, ultimately, we decided to go national and become a building block for the whole industry. It was one of those pivotal moments in the history of the organization. That big decision unlocked the entire industry to us.
Wow. And when you did, the moment turned into something.
It did. Once we opened the floodgates, we started getting applications from youth organizations all over the country, and the sporting goods companies, when they realized we had demand all over the country and we could handle volume that would support kids everywhere, they started thinking about us as a much bigger partner for their product.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
In a world that often focuses on just the end result, what's the final score? How do you convey consistently this idea that the journey is really what matters? Especially here we are, we're celebrating the goal, but how do you keep the message on the journey?
That depends a little bit on how you define the journey, but for us, it is always more kids need our help. And it's also our personal journeys. I am not as good of a leader yet as I'm going to be. So I'm always thinking about, how do we continue to grow and get better individually and collectively? As long as you never feel like you've done enough or accomplished enough, there's always more journey to go. It's that sort of positive, future focused mindset. That's what I encourage our whole team to believe and buy into, is that failure is just learning. The more we learn, the better we get. We're never done with either.
Yeah. 10 million kids, 100 million. What's next? Do we have a number that is now the shingle you're hanging out to say, like McDonald's, 7 billion served or whatever it is?
My ultimate goal, what I think is truly the end of the road, is when we are in a society that thinks that movement and physical activity and sport for every kid every day is essential. Until we get there, we're not done. And there's a lot of barriers to getting there. So from my point of view, there's still a long road ahead.
Mm.
What that looks like in terms of number of kids or number of dollars, or, I don't know. But it's important that we change the way we think about childhood development to incorporate sport and movement all the time.
I love it. Melissa, how does a listener best connect with you and with Good Sports?
Well, there's lots of information about Good Sports on our website at goodsports.org. And you'll also find us on all of the social platforms, whatever your favorite is. And then you can reach me directly at mharper@goodsports.org.
Awesome. Melissa Harper, I am grateful that you joined us today, that I got a chance to learn about an organization I didn't know much about, but one I'm proud to be able to say we're aligned with completely. Thanks today for being a corporate competitor with us.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Man, I love the conversation, love the learning and the ability to understand and feel the passion that Melissa and her team have for solving this big, hairy issue. Pretty impressive. Three things that I took away from today's conversation. The first was the idea that if you want to be successful, keep your clarity of mission front and simple. Make it simple. When she described what she did as creating a food bank for sporting goods, who can't understand that? She was able to make it so easy to digest, because sometimes you only get a couple of minutes in front of the people you're trying to convince that they need to invest themselves in joining you on the journey. Can you reduce the problem you're trying to solve to a bumper sticker? But then once you start growing a little bit, you got to make sure you can have stories of impact. You need to have data. Data is important, but the stories will drive the opportunity for you to have longer term success. And then finally, I loved her concept of never being satisfied. Even though she recognizes that the issue that they now are trying to solve, the issue they are taking on is systemic, which means you likely will never fully solve it. She believes and understands it's not about perfection, it's about progress. It's about being better tomorrow than we are today. It's about the idea that we may not solve it for all children, but one more child is playing today because we did what we do and did it well. I love that concept of never being satisfied and recognizing that as big as the issue is, you only get to eat that elephant one bite at a time. Thank you today for joining us, for learning more about this really cool charity, and for becoming a greater corporate competitor than you were yesterday. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Feedback helps us spread the insights of our guests to a wider audience. It actually increases our ratings. Thank you so much for those who have done so in the past. And catch new episodes every Wednesday. Subscribe at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to be the first to get a chance to listen. And as a thank you gift, I will send you a chapter from one of my best-selling books. Stay connected with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My handle is @DonYaeger, DonYaeger. And until next week, I appreciate you.